quiet my nerves, y'all. Public speaking is not my thing. But I was recently asked, why do you think prisoners should have the right to vote? I wouldn't be Vicky's son if I didn't speak up and speak my piece. The United States of America is established as using a democratic republic form of government. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, democratic means a form of government which the people choose leaders by voting, which is a democracy. Republic means a country that's governed by elected representatives and an elected leader like the president, rather than the king or queen. Those words are somewhat synonymous. His government is governed by people who are voted in and elected to represent the people, its citizens. If America is really a democracy, all citizens should have the right to vote for the people that make the laws and policies that dictate their day-to-day lives. Prisoners are still citizens in this democracy, even though at one point they may have violated the law which led to their current incarceration. As human beings and citizens in this democracy, those incarcerated need to have the ability to exercise their right to vote for who they believe will best represent them, because the elected representatives are still making laws and policies that dictate their day-to-day lives as well. Now, the main purpose of voting and electing officials is people representation. So if incarcerated citizens aren't allowed to vote for representatives, who represents those incarcerated? No one does. That's the main reason not much is done with the criminal justice reform. You hear it being talked about. Everyone knows that there's serious problems with the criminal justice system. There's been a lot of talk about reform, and that's exactly what it is, talk. It's all rhetoric. How do we expect reform in the criminal justice system when the people who are mostly affected by the system are not allowed to participate in a political process that's responsible for reforming it? Here's a quote from attorney Brittany K. Barnett, who was for her friend Glenn Martin. The people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. They're just the furthest away from the power and the resources. That's exactly what it is when it comes to reforming the criminal justice system. The disenfranchisement of the people closest to the problem pushes them the furthest away from the power and resources, which purposely makes it impossible to reach a meaningful solution. So let me ask you this. If incarcerated citizens were allowed to vote and participate in the political process, do you think that's going to turn the prisons into hotels and the prison cells into penthouses and hotel suites? Do you think it's going to turn the horrible food incarcerated citizens eat into five-star meals? That's probably what the people who oppose from restoring the prisoners' voting rights might want you to think will happen. But what restoring the voting rights of incarcerated citizens may do is increase the chances of Department of Corrections finally implementing and enforcing the required rehabilitative programs so those incarcerated can leave prison in a better state than when they entered the system. That would make our community better and safer. What restoring the voting rights of incarcerated citizens may do is require for-profit medical vendors to provide meaningful medical care and mental health services to those incarcerated. In prisons, incarcerated citizens are being forced to endure unnecessary pain. They lose limbs or even die from diseases that could have been curable had the citizens received treatment in time. Citizens with serious mental illnesses barely get the treatment that they're supposed to receive as well. When they report to the staff that they're in a crisis or a mental breakdown, all the staff does is strip the citizens of their clothing, leaving them naked with just a smock and a blanket, and lock them in a room with an officer watching them from the outside of the cell. That only exacerbates their stress. And they stay like that for at least 24 hours or longer until the citizen feels like the mental breakdown is over. Incarcerated citizens rarely receive meaningful treatment because for-profit vendors that are contracted by the DOC are more worried about their profits than they are about providing meaningful medical care and mental health services to its patients. And there's no meaningful laws that require them to do better. What restoring the voting rights of incarcerated citizens may do is increase the chances of incarcerated citizens being finally treated like humans and not three-fifths of a human. Restoring the voting rights of incarcerated citizens may reduce the amount of physical, mental, and emotional abuse that's bestowed upon them by the same people that's supposed to be protecting them. I've seen men get tased and sprayed with tear gas for no reason at all until they're vomiting up their food and the COs are just laughing at them. A few of these men suffer with asthma and were damn near dying before they received any medical help. I've seen men getting beaten by officers, kicked, stomped, punched in their faces with gloves equipped with solid knuckles, the equivalent of brass knuckles, while ripping the man's dreads out. I've seen COs spit in the man's food daily for several days straight. The individual could only drink milk or eat the food that was sealed when it was served to him. It got to the point where other incarcerated citizens, including myself, would slide him some of our food that we hope was safe. I've seen COs sick dogs on citizens after he was beaten and handcuffed. You can hear him screaming out in pain as the dog's teeth ripped off a piece of his side. And while this is going on, the superintendent of the institution was right here in the housing unit, and the commissioner of the DOC was in the institution as well. That reminded me like the videos from the civil rights movement in the 1960s when they were fighting for their voting rights. Many people won't be surprised if something happened to me for speaking about all of this, but I can't let that silence me, though. I can't. And this is what I know regarding the treatment of incarcerated men. I can only imagine what the women are going through. Obviously, there's no phones to record the abuse that take place behind these walls. The only cameras inside are the ones controlled by DOC officials who hide and destroy whatever evidence that's not in their favor. They only show the media the few videos that support their mainly false narratives. There's no transparency. There's no transparency because there's no laws that force the DOC to be transparent. There's no laws that force the DOC to be transparent because the elected lawmakers are not passing transparency laws. The lawmakers are not passing transparency laws because incarcerated citizens who the transparency laws will protect are not allowed to vote to elect any of those lawmakers. When a few of Massachusetts elected officials filed the Black Lives Matter bill that protects citizens from police brutality, that bill included language that protected incarcerated citizens from the correctional brutality that I previously mentioned as well. Because that bill would have also protected incarcerated citizens from physical abuse from the government, that bill did not get passed. That bill did not pass until after, and only after, they admitted from that bill that they omitted from that bill the language that protected incarcerated citizens and the language that mandated transparency from the DOC. So the majority of our elected officials basically told the DOC that it's okay to tase us, mace us, beat us, stick dogs on us, torture us, and deliver other forms of inhumane treatment upon us and its incarcerated citizens whenever they want. The only reason the lawmakers did not pass the original bill, which would have protected the incarcerated citizens from physical abuse, is because the incarcerated citizens are not allowed to vote to elect any of them. No one represents the incarcerated citizens, and that may be a big reason why the criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex has failed our communities, which only seem to be getting worse. People don't realize 90% of those incarcerated are not carrying out life sentences and will be going home one day, usually back into the same community. Contrary to what people are told or what the public is told was being done with their tax dollars, during the incarceration, many citizens are not receiving proper mental health services, nor are they being enrolled into or being allowed to complete educational programs. And to top that off, they're enduring years and years of harsh and inhumane treatment by the very people who are being paid by your tax dollars to protect them. And that's their entire incarceration experience until they're released. So when an ex-offender reoffends, usually for a worse offense, people say he didn't learn anything from the last time he was locked up. That's the sad truth. But that's usually because he wasn't taught anything but violence and pain the whole time he was locked up. Those cycles in the community is only going to continue unless there's a real reform in the criminal justice reform. Now, how can we expect reform in the criminal justice system when the people who are mostly affected by the system are not allowed to participate in the political process that's responsible for reforming it? We can't expect that. We have to put an end to voter suppression. Mass incarceration is one of the biggest forms of voter suppression in this country. Letting it be okay to suppress the votes of one group of people is leaving the loophole to suppress the votes of another group. By completely locking a citizen out of the process that creates the laws, you are only conditioning his mind to remain an outlaw. Universal suffrage needs to be a priority. My name is Tommy Kirkland, a U.S. citizen, incarcerated at Susan Baranowski Correctional Center in Shirley, Massachusetts. Thank you for your time and support, and I will fight towards restoring voting rights. Take care and be safe.
The caller has hung up.